Hello. Hi, it's me, Vicki Marie. So here we are on Sunday evening, Coronation weekend. If you're in the UK or wherever you are, did you watch Coronation? What did you do? Did you have a party? I went to a party. I really enjoyed it. As you probably know, I'm not really a royalist. I'm not really into that sort of thing, but I'm always up for a party. So we had a lovely party, and to be honest, I'm still suffering a little bit today from it because it was sort of an all-day thing. I'm sure there's a few of you out there that are, were celebrating yesterday one way or another, and maybe today's been a bit of a quiet day. Well, if you are in the UK, of course, you've got tomorrow as well. You've got an extra day, haven't you? Holiday, no work tomorrow. Okay, so I don't know if there's anybody out there, let me know, because I can't tell on here. Maybe there isn't anybody out there, but if there is anybody out there, don't forget to say hello, so that I know that I'm not on my own, and that there are people out there. If there's nobody out there, that's fine too, because I will just carry on and tell you about the lovely Dr. Shipman. Oh, it looks like there's 4 people out there watching, so there are some people out there. I've finally worked out how to tell. Anyway, thank you for being here with me tonight, and thanks for giving your time to watch this video. So, oh gosh, so I've been sort of all morning researching this. I mean, I already knew a lot about this case because obviously it's a very famous case. Dr. Harold Shipman, I don't know if young people know about it because, the story finished, if you like, quite a while ago when he deleted himself in prison. But he is the most prolific serial killer of all time, really, ever. And we still don't really know, and we probably never will know the exact number of his victims. And that's what makes him so unique, if you like. And I think we all, as human beings, we always want to try and understand other people, don't we, and their motives. We have this fascination with true crime, with serial killers especially. It's like we almost can't help because we don't understand how people can do things like that. We want to understand it. With Dr. Shipman, especially, to me, Dr. Harold Shipman, I don't know if you've ever heard the expression a double deviant, but a deviant is someone who deviates away from the normal rules and norms of society. So that would be anyone really that commits crime. And, obviously some crimes are more serious than others. A double deviant is someone, quite often you hear it referring to women who kill, because there's like, the terrible thing they do in killing, and then society looks on it as a double deviance because they don't expect women to kill, especially not children. And this was a term that was bandied around a lot, at the times of the Moors murderers and Myra Hindley, that I think there was this special sort of disgust because she was a woman and women aren't supposed to kill children. It's like what we expect from people. Now, Dr. Shipman, he was a double deviant for a different reason. He wasn't a woman, obviously, but he was in a position of trust. Nobody expects a doctor to do these sort of things. So his double deviance, if you like, comes from that. He was a killer, which is a deviant, but it was a double deviant in the sense that he was a doctor, and doctors, that again, it's like an especial disgust for doctors because they're supposed to save lives, not to take lives. And I sometimes refer to him as a triple deviant because he picked on such vulnerable people. You know, it's like we try to protect the vulnerable in our society, don't we? Children, old people, etc. They're the vulnerable in our society. When we're in the middle of our lives, that's when we're at our strongest. When we're children, we're very vulnerable. Then we come into adulthood and we go for a time where, you know, we're stronger. And then, of course, as we get older, we become more vulnerable again. And so people who pick or who prey on the vulnerable, other people that are vulnerable are sex workers, anyone who's not in a position where they're in control of their whole life, their own lives. And I think someone that's even worse. I'm back. I'm back. Sorry. So let's talk about Mr. Shipman, Dr. Shipman. Now, he operated in Manchester. So his victims, I'm from Manchester. So a lot of good things have come out of Manchester. We've got Oasis, of course, the whole sort of gig culture. There's a lot of brilliant music that's come out of Manchester, Manchester City. Even the Red Team, the other one, they're still, you know, they're good thing. They're famous all over the world. We've got a large industrial heritage. We've got canal networks. I mean, Manchester is a lovely place. It's got a vibrant nightlife, etc. But unfortunately, there's been a couple of bad things as well that have happened in Manchester. One of which is this story that I'm going to tell you today about Harold Shipman. And the other one, of course, is the Moors murderers. Now, I want to make it clear, though, that Ian Brady, he wasn't from Manchester, he was from Glasgow, but Myra Hindley was from Manchester, unfortunately. And Dr. Shipman wasn't from Manchester, he's from Nottingham, he was born in Nottingham, but the crimes he committed were mainly in Manchester, though he did commit some in Yorkshire as well, in his first doctor's practice. So let's have a look at him himself. Let's have a look at when he was born. Let's think about, you know, the sort of time that he was born in. He was born in Nottingham in January 1946. So, yeah, he was one of the boomer, they call them the boomers, don't they, that generation. And he, you know, I think his childhood was quite sort of unnotable. He wasn't one of these children, you know, sometimes with serial killers later on they say, oh, there were signs because they were cruel to animals, or they did this or they did that. I don't think there was any of that with Harold. He was, I think most psychologists say that Harold's problems started he was 17 and he died of cancer. I'm very sort of reluctant to, apparently had a really nice relationship with his mother. Then some people say she was too insistent on his education, so it meant he was slightly isolated from other children, because while they were sort of being children, he was really concentrating on his education. But I'm really wary, you know, I think there's too much blame on mothers. You know, what about his father? I haven't heard anything said really about his father. You know, nobody ever concentrates on the father, always blaming the mother, which is a bit irritating. But anyway, poor Vera had cancer and she died when he was 17. And this was after quite a long illness. And he would have witnessed that. I mean, it must have been terrible. It must have been very, very traumatic to see his mum go through that. And she was, of course, given morphine, you know, to help with the pain, etc., until she died. And a lot of psychologists sort of link this to what he ended up doing with a lot of his patients, and certainly the elderly women that he murdered. He murdered a lot of women, a lot of elderly women. But as we'll see later, one thing that I found in the research, which I didn't actually know, and I know quite a lot about this case, he did kill one child as well. Not a lot of people know that about Dr. Shipman. He did kill one child, but I'm going to go into that later. So apparently it was when his mother died when he was 17, that was when he decided to be a doctor. And before then, he'd not really had any, there'd been no inclination to be a doctor. So something happened there. Maybe, he thought he'd like to help people. Who knows? I mean, we don't know. So we only know the monster he became. We don't know the adolescent that he was then. A lot is made of the way he dealt with his mother's death. A friend of his said that they were going to school. I think she must have died over the weekend because they were off to school on the Monday morning, and he used to meet Harold at the corner and they'd walk to school together. And he said, like, how was your weekend or whatever? And Harold said, oh, well, my mum died. And of course, his friend said, oh, gosh, that's awful. How are you coping? And what did you do? And he said, oh, well, I went for a run. And now there's a big thing made of this, but I can see why he went for a run. I mean, I don't run. I've never really liked running. I did run when I was in my 30s a little bit, but I never really liked it. I like playing squash and things, exercise and things. It does help you get, if apparently he went off on a run and he ran for hours and hours in the pouring rain. Now, I can understand that. Surely you could do that. You just like want to, any of you out there who are runners, let me know. You can go out, forget all your problems, blank run. It must feel, so I don't see that there's any real significance in that. It seems like a thing that somebody would do, especially a 17-year-old boy who's probably struggling to cope with dealing with it emotionally. Anyway, so he's decided to become a doctor, and he goes to university in Leeds to study to be a doctor. And that's where he meets his future wife on a double-decker bus. So he's obviously going on this bus every day to university. His wife, or she wasn't his wife at the time, but Primrose, she was, I'm presuming it wasn't just one time that they were on the bus together. I'm presuming perhaps they saw each other regularly on the bus, and they got talking, and within a very short time, Primrose was pregnant. And as really what used to happen in those days, they very shortly after that got married. And they were married they were married right up to his arrest. And it seems to have been a happy marriage from what I can gather. There's certainly nothing that I saw in the research that I did of any problems in the marriage. Primrose stuck by him for quite a long time. And, it's generally felt that she didn't know anything about, what he was doing. And of course, they had 3 children as well. So, we have to think about them, don't we? Not only the families of the victims, but the family of the perpetrator when they're innocent, and they've got caught up in this whole thing. It must be awful to find out suddenly that your dad is a serial killer, and not only a serial killer, but the worst serial killer of all time. Your husband, who you thought was a respected doctor, etc., turns out to be, that just must be awful too. So my heart does go out to them as well. Now, there were early warning signs because shortly after they got married, Harold, he started having blackouts. And he was diagnosed as having epilepsy. And in fact, Primrose then, she had to drive him to his, to visit his patients, etc., because you can't drive if you've been diagnosed with epilepsy. So he had to be driven by Primrose. But it wasn't. He didn't have epilepsy. His problem was he was addicted to pethidine, and he'd started taking pethidine, and he was an addict. Now, whether that is related to when his mother, what his mother had to go through, or I don't know. I mean, who knows? We can't ask him because he's gone now from this earth, but we don't know why he started taking pethidine, but he did anyway, and so it had a severe effect on him. Anyway, in the end, he was caught, and in 1976, he was in court, and he admitted 8 counts of obtaining drugs under false pretenses. But there were 74 other offences, presumed against him. Anyway, he admitted to 8, and he was fined £600, but he wasn't struck off. He was still allowed to practice medicine. I don't know. I mean, all right, he hadn't, well, as far as we know, he hadn't murdered anybody yet. But really, a doctor, even if he wouldn't be struck off, well, I presume because he had to go for detox, etc. He went for detox. Apparently, he was clean. And then in 1979, that's when he went to Hyde, to the Donnybrook Doctor's Surgery in Hyde. He went for his interview. He was honest about his past. He told them, that he'd had this problem and that he'd been to court and he'd had to pay this fine. He was totally honest about it. And they decided to take a chance on him and give him another chance. They decided that he deserved another chance. And they took him on in the practice as an associate. And there you go. That was how it all started, really. Now, one of my cousins, again, another reason why I feel a personal sort of thing with this case, because it was in Manchester and it wasn't far from me. And one of my cousins actually worked for him, not at that surgery, but when he went off to be independent. And the only thing obviously she didn't know he was a murderer. She didn't work there very long, but she said, I always had the impression that he just didn't like women. He was quite aloof. He was quite, what's the word I'm looking for? He was very dismissive. He was the dogs. He was the dog's gonads. He was the king in there, and nobody else's opinion mattered. So, right, I don't know if anybody's trying to send any. Oh, here I've got comments up here. Sorry, I don't think I've got them. I'm not ignoring you. Ah, there you go, Lottie. Hello. Sunny day, but I don't know where. It's been raining here today in Spain this morning, but it's quite sort of hot and clammy. We had a little bit of, a storm this morning, some thunder and lightning, etc. And it's still a little bit clammy. It feels like it might rain, but it's warm. But it's not. It's been a bit cloudy. But anyway, that's just aside. So I found the comments now. I'm sorry if anybody commented before that, but for some reason I had them. Hi, Lottie. I had them tucked away somewhere, so I don't. I didn't see them. So sorry. I wasn't ignoring anybody. So where were we? Oh yeah. So he's gone to this practice in Hyde, and we don't know. Maybe he started there, or maybe he started before that when he was in Yorkshire. Anyway, let's go on. So he started in this practice in Hyde. He worked there quite a long time. They were happy with him. The patients loved him. They all thought he was brilliant. They all thought he had this fantastic way with people. So he was very popular, and the practice felt that they'd made the right decision by giving him because he was popular. And in the UK then, and probably now anybody in the medical profession maybe knows better than me, surgeries, GP surgeries, will get paid from the government depending on how many patients they had. So it was great that he was so popular. And apparently he had this massive workload. He could, he would take on work, more work than the other doctors did. He just seemed to be perfect, in every way. And he would just get on with his caseload. And so it was really good for the practice. However, eventually he decided that he was going to leave that practice and he was going to go and start practice on his own. And when he did that, he took 3,000 patients with him. So all this nice relationship they had with the people at the Donnybrook, with that practice, that just disintegrated, because you can imagine they weren't really best pleased that he turned around and said he was going to go and set up on his own. And not only that, he's taken 3,000. I mean, 3,000, that's a lot of people, isn't it? And, Hyde's not a very big place. It's not a tiny village, but it's not a big city either. It's a sort of a town, if you like, an average-sized town with a village feel, I think you would say, because it is a community where everybody knows each other, etc. So he took these 3,000 people with him, and off he went to start up his own surgery, where he had nobody looking over his shoulder. He could do, Lottie, you're in Devon. Yeah, well, and you've got some sun. Oh, good. Perfect. You need to send it over here to Spain, because we haven't really got any at the moment. So yeah, now before I carry on with that story, I want to tell you about this one child that he killed. So I think a lot of people, even if they know a bit about this case, we always think that he killed elderly patients, mainly women, which he did, but he did kill some younger people as well. It's a misconception to think that all his victims were elderly. They weren't. And this one child was caught. I want to mention her because I just think victims get forgotten, and it's really irritates me that I've never heard of this victim, because why? This victim is important, and especially important because she was 4 years old. Her name was Susie Garfitt. Now, she was very poorly. She was very, very poorly. She was a quadriplegic, and she was suffering from cerebral palsy, and she had pneumonia. She was in hospital with pneumonia, and she was very, very ill. But her mother, Anne, had said to Dr. Shipman, "Oh, be kind to her." But she insists that she never said to him, gave him any reason to think that she wanted him to sort of put her daughter out of her misery, so to speak. And her mother, they were in the hospital. The mother went off to have a cup of tea in the hospital canteen minutes later, and the door was closed, and a nurse came out and told her that her daughter had left this earth. And she wasn't there with her. It was so. Anyway, there was an inquiry. Nothing came out of it. There was no charges pressed, etc. But the mother insists she never said to him, "Oh yes, to do something." Would she? I mean, of course, it's not legal anyway. Euthanasia is not legal in the UK. Still isn't legal. It's legal here in Spain now, but it's not legal in the UK. So, whether the mother had said anything or not, he still shouldn't have done it, because the doctor's purpose is to sustain life, isn't it? That's what doctors are supposed to do, and it's not. But he had a God. In my eyes, he had a God complex. He thought he was God. He thought he had the power to decide who should live or die for whatever reason that he decided was the correct reason. Maybe he decided that Susie was suffering so much, but he didn't have the right to do that. So I just wanted to mention about Susie, and it was in 1972. So, you know, if he was suspected of that then, or maybe he wasn't at the time, maybe it's only in the light of things that have happened. And yes, Lottie, you're right, Dr. Shipman is fascinating, because it is the sort of thing that could have happened to any of us if we were lucky enough to have him as a doctor. And the whole problem was, because he was a doctor, nobody, well, most people didn't suspect him, but even people who suspected him, it's very difficult to talk against a doctor. It's very I hope you... Right, I think I'm back in the Hi, Lynn. Sorry, sometimes my, I don't know if the internet's bad tonight, might be because of the storm we've had. Sometimes the internet goes a little bit strange when you have bad weather, because it doesn't happen very often. So hi, Lynn, thank you. Thank you for being here. Right, okay, so yes, so what I was saying about a doctor, you know, how do you actually, even if you suspect that there's something untoward, how do you actually, you know, approach that subject? Because the thing is, if you're wrong as well, I mean, this is their career you're talking about for a start. One, they're a respected professional, and he was respected. He'd been a doctor by now for a long time. His patients loved him. There were some little jokes going around, like they would say things like, oh yeah, Dr. Shipman is a really good doctor, but you don't last long with him. You know, like, so there was sort of like, it probably started as jokes, and then they'd go beyond a joke when, you know, it really felt, but what do you do? Who do you go to? Who do you tell? But anyway, let's look at some of the, so there were some suspicions put out before he was actually eventually found out for something completely different, really, because eventually it was, he got greedy. He's just like, to me, most serial killers that end up getting caught, that's what happens. They get so convinced of their own omnipotence that they think they can do anything, and they're cleverer than everybody else, and they're not cleverer than everybody else, but they think they are, and they start to let their guard down after time. And that's what he did, really. He got greedy as well, and maybe he started panicking because people were starting to ask questions. So let me give you some facts about the deaths. In one 12-month period, there were 36 deaths at Harold Shipman's surgery with no post-mortems performed. 36 deaths. He was 2.5 times more than average for doctors' surgeries. His surgery had 2.5 times more deaths than other surgeries. 5 of his patients actually died in the surgery while they were actually on their appointment. And apparently, if you ask, that is unheard of. Most doctors will say to you that never ever happens, but he had 5 people actually die in his office. There were 6 patients from one street died, and then in 1 month 8 patients died in 1 month. You know, it was, and the other thing that was happening, these patients, well, right, no, I need to say something else first. So, as I say, there was a little bit of unrest, if you like. There was one particular doctor who, her name was Linda Reynolds. She's unfortunately not with us anymore. She died of cancer, bless her. But in March 1998, she became a bit suspicious of his death levels. You know, she thought they were high. But again, you know, what do you do? Where do you take that information? And then the funeral directors, the local funeral directors, which were Frank Massey and Son. Well, it was called Frank Massey and Son, but it was actually his daughter, Deborah, that started to get suspicious a number of deaths that were coming through from Harold Shipman's surgery. And she spoke to her dad about it, and her dad initially said to her, oh, no, you know, and tried to sort of poo-poo the idea. But in the end, he did decide to go and see Dr. Shipman. I mean, this sort of chills me a bit, because I think he was lucky to come out of that surgery alive when he made that decision to go and see Harold Shipman in his surgery. So apparently, when at the end of the day, there was nobody else there, just him and Harold Shipman. But he was in a very dangerous position there, wasn't he? I mean, but anyway. And he said that Harold Shipman didn't bat an eyelid. He went to him and said, oh, there's been some questions raised about the number of deaths that are coming from your surgery. And he said he didn't bat an eyelid. He just went over to his death register, opened it up in front of him and said, look, anyone can come and see this register at any time they want. I've got nothing to hide. And he said, you know, I felt sort of silly, you know, for sort of even bringing it up. It was just his manner, and I was thinking, oh gosh, you know, I've done the wrong thing here. And even his daughter, Deborah, who had initially brought these concerns, she said as time went on, he was her doctor. She was going to see him, you know, as a doctor after that. And she said as time went on, it just all seemed, I just started to think, oh, I was silly to think that, you know, I think you reason of your mind, you try and talk yourself out of things, don't you? You like that. It's like if you think you've had sort of maybe seen a ghost or something strange has happened, you talk yourself out of it. Your reason mind talks you out of it, and you don't want to believe it, and you can easily talk yourself out of things, I think. And also bearing in mind that these things, maybe the Dr. Linda and the funeral director didn't speak to each other, you know, so we don't know. But there was all this, there was a general suspicion. Then you've got the public sort of making this joke, like, oh yeah, Harold Shipman is a good doctor, but you don't last long with him. You know, sort of all these things happening separately, but I suppose they didn't all come together. Now I want to tell you about Bianca Pomfret, because this was this lady. She was his patient for many years. She was 49, so she was quite young, you know. I mean, obviously you don't think 49 is young when you're 26, but you do when you're 60, so you know it's all relative, isn't it? But she was young compared to most of his other victims, who were mainly elderly people. And she was a manic depressive, bless her, and she was struggling, and she adored Harold Shipman so much. You know, her ex-husband, because they did divorce eventually, he wanted to move away from Hyde, and she refused to go because she said she wouldn't go because she'd have to change her doctor, and she wasn't prepared to change her doctor. So he says, again, looking back, because of course we only understand things in hindsight, don't we? You know, looking back, she just showed how she'd come to rely on him, that she wouldn't even move with her husband because she was too concerned that would mean she would have to change doctor. Hi, Maya. Is it Maya or Mia? Maya, I presume. Hi, thank you. So now what she did then as well, after she divorced her husband, so I just have a little drink. I'm not on wine tonight, I'm on pink tonic. Schweppes, I probably shouldn't advertise, I don't know if I'm allowed to or not. Anyway, right, so Bianca. It's very sad because maybe she was in love with him. Some people say maybe she was in love with him. May have even been some sort of a relationship between them, but we don't know that for sure. So we don't know. That is pure speculation. But I think one thing we do know is she was obsessed with him. Yes, no, Lynn, you're right. Lynn's saying there was a taxi driver. No, I was watching that today. There was a taxi driver who said, look, I mean, I don't know why. It's like I'm sort of laughing. It's like that nervous laugh. He lost so many clients because, you know, a lot of elderly people, to go to the doctors, they'll get a taxi. You know, my people in my family do it, because even though they drive, they don't necessarily want to drive, especially in the winter, etc. And so he lost so many of his clients. He noticed that all these people that he was taking to Dr. Shipman's surgery, they were sort of dying. And he noticed, and he tried to bring it to but, you know, I think, again, this is because of him being a doctor. I think that these signs were ignored. He was a doctor. He was middle class, white man, you know, people don't want to believe that, do they? We have an idea that doctors are respectable, and nothing ever came of it. But all these people did try and raise concerns at the time. But going back to Bianca, so she actually changed her will and left everything to Harold Shipman. And she told her ex-husband about this because they were still, you know, friends. And he talked her out of it. She convinced her to change it again, to leave everything, not to him, but to their grandchildren, because they're children and grandchildren. Now, she told her ex-husband that she had told Dr. Shipman that she had left him everything in her will. So finally, she died on the 10th of December, 1997. Natural causes. I mean, she was 49 years old. I mean, what did he say that she died of? I don't know. But anyway, she died, no post-mortem. And now, after the investigations, it's not clear if he killed her because he thought he was in her will, because that is what she had told him, or did she tell him that she had changed her mind and taken him out of the will, and then did he get angry and do it just out of anger? I mean, we don't know. We don't know his motives. But anyway, he killed her because when she was exhumed, she had high levels of morphine, like the other victims. So he definitely did kill her. So that was Bianca. And that leads us on to his final victim, which brought about his downfall, because he was thinking he was so clever. The police, when they actually arrested him and were interviewing him, etc., they said he was so superior. He thought he was so superior to everyone. He made it perfectly clear that they were his, hey, DMV videos, hi. So they made it clear he made it clear as a bell that they were all beneath him, that he was, you know, more intelligent than everybody, and he was really disappointed, you know, that he was only being interviewed by a detective, you know, not by the chief constable, or, you know, he thought he deserved more respect, etc., that he was above everybody else. Anyway, so in the end, he wasn't actually arrested on suspicion of murder. What happened was he forged a will. And this lady, Mrs. Grundy, she was a sprightly 81-year-old who was well known in Hyde. She'd previously been the mayoress of Hyde. Although she was 81 years old, she was fit, she was active. She was, you know, she had no sort of immediate health problems, not that were likely for her to die anyway. And she died. And she'd been to his surgery the day before. Oh, I'm sorry, I've missed one part. So before this, he had one day while she was in his surgery, he'd called one of the patients in from the waiting room and asked him to witness a paper. Would he mind signing a paper with Mrs. Grundy to... He didn't say what it was, but the patient just presumed it was something to do with medical things. So he said, yes, fine, no problem, I'll witness it. He went into the room. They all signed the paper. He said that Dr. Shipman said to Mrs. Grundy, are you okay with this? Are you sure you're okay with it? But he still didn't know exactly what it was. And she said, yes, that's fine. And so we think, or the police think, that he told Mrs. Grundy it was something to do with a medical procedure, or, you know, he'd give her some cocky. He obviously wasn't telling her you're signing your will, like signing everything over to me. And he typed this will up on a typewriter. Anyway, so this is, now you can imagine how stupid was that. Now, when she died, because she was found, you know, like many of his victims, sitting up in a chair practically with a cup of tea on the table. This is what was strange as well with all these victims. Very few of them were actually found in bed. They were sat up in the chair, dressed as, you know, he might have been round there just a few hours earlier. It wasn't, you know, it was just too coincidental that all these elderly people would be found sat up in a chair. So, of course, the daughter of this lady, when she found out that apparently her mom had left everything to her doctor, obviously she was really suspicious. Because, you know, this is where he's shown his stupidity. He thought he was clever, but did he not think that unless actually that mother and daughter were completely estranged, which they weren't, wouldn't anyone think, why has my mom left all that money, left her estate to a doctor, and what, you know, why has she cut me out of a will? You know, that nobody's going to leave that unchallenged, are they? Unless, as I say, maybe they were estranged, but they weren't. You know, they had a good relationship. There's no problem with their relationship. So it was her family who went to the police, and the police started investigating, not for murder initially. They didn't think that this would be a murder investigation. They went for the forgery, you know, the fact of the will, that he'd forged the will. And of course, that's where everything started. And, you know, can you imagine what that was like? They're sort of suddenly, you know, 1 minute they're investigating a forgery case, and it turns out like, well, possibly it was a murder. And then it's, oh, well, how many other people have murdered? And then in the end, it's over 250 souls that he was responsible for dispatching, playing God when he had no right to take anybody else's life. And, you know, that generation of elderly people, that's like my parents' generation. And my parents, they thought doctors were gods. Anything a doctor would, you know, now I think we know that everyone's fallible. Doesn't matter if you're a doctor or whatever you are. You're a human being. You're not some superhuman being. But in those days, I remember my parents, the doctors were like, whatever the doctor told you, that's what you did. It didn't matter whether you didn't Google it and see if it was the right thing, you know, to do. You just did it because the doctor told you to do it. And I remember my father was really incensed at this man because of the way he took these vulnerable ladies, mainly ladies, not all ladies, but mainly ladies, took their lives. Sometimes he did it because they were just irritating him. You know, like some elderly people, they do go to the doctors a lot, don't they? Sometimes that's what, they haven't got much else maybe going on in their lives. If they're a bit lonely, and they'll go to the doctors really for a day out or for a chat. I mean, that does happen. And it irritated him. They irritated him. So many of the people that he sort of got rid of, they were just irritating him. Or he wanted to carry on claiming their drugs, like, because he was still addicted to morphine or pethidine himself. So he would carry on taking those prescriptions and using some of it for himself. It's just horrible. But But they thought he was brilliant, you know, thought he was a lovely doctor. Oh, dear me, it's awful, isn't it? And then there was one guy, quite a youngish guy, who thought he had cancer and he was receiving cancer treatment. Anyway, I don't know how this happened, but he had chemotherapy, and then afterwards he was on morphine, which Dr. Shipman was administering to him, etc. Then, for some unknown reason, which seems a bit strange to me, but anyway, apparently it was found that he'd never had cancer in the first place, and the lab that had done the test let Dr. Shipman know this, for him to let his patient know, and he never told him because he wanted to carry on getting the morphine. And the father of this patient went round to see Dr. Shipman because he didn't like the way his son seemed to be deteriorating, and Dr. Shipman killed him. He was one of the ones that he killed, you know. Gosh, so anyone got close to finding out the truth, I mean, makes you think twice about just holding your arm out for an injection. So when you're in the doctor and they say you need an injection, maybe, I mean, I would say what for, and I'd want to know why, because I'm just that sort of person. I hate going to the doctors. Maybe part of the reason I hate going is because of this, you know, but I think a lot of people, my son included, they really respect doctors, and there's not many people that would turn around and say, oh no, I don't want that injection. But and certainly not in that generation, in those times. Now we do question more, I think, but then you didn't question anything. If the doctor told you to do it, you would do it, whatever it was. And that's what he relied on. So he would make appointments with these people. So he would, with Mrs. Grundy, the day before she was in his surgery, and he made an appointment to go around to see her the next day to give her an injection. So he's literally made an appointment to kill her. You know, it's just, it's chilling, isn't it? It's more chilling than anything that you can imagine. And the other thing he did, because then computers were just coming in, this is what I think led to his downfall as well, because computers were just coming in then. It was in the early days, you know, before that everything would have been in files, and now they were starting to keep records on computer. And he was going on the computer maybe the day before and registering someone as already been, you know, as dying the day after, and changing the date on the computer, because he wasn't so clever as he thought, and he didn't realize that these things could be checked, you know, that the police would know if a date had been changed on the computer, or if information had been changed. And that was part of the evidence that led to, you know, because obviously to prosecute someone you need evidence. So thankfully, those kind of things did show, you know, that he was complicit in these crimes. So he was charged, I think, with 8 deaths initially, and then as the investigation, I mean, gosh, how many bodies they must have exhumed, how many families, you know, affected. I mean, if they're thinking he had 200, at least 250 victims, you know, and I always think, as I say, for every one victim, there's another 3, 4, 5 victims because of family or friends who are affected, you know, not obviously murdered, but affected for the rest of their lives. So there's 250 people killed, times that by 5, you know, and then just the general public, how it will have affected their lives, how it will have affected other doctors in their processes, you know, and there has been a Shipman effect where a lot of practices have been changed, you know, doctors' practices have been changed because of him, because of what he did. And then his own family being victims. Yeah. So just unbelievable, isn't it? I mean, what do you think about it? Let me know what you think, and in comments maybe after. I've got video, I mean, obviously I'm doing this live and I'm talking about it but I've got a video planned as well that will go out in the week, which will be more with photos, etc., and just going over the story again, and maybe be able to some of the victims, etc. And let's talk about Primrose, his wife, a little bit. And I feel for Primrose. I mean, she was married to him for years. Can you imagine finding that out? Your husband, who you think is a respected doctor, you're thinking, you know, because apparently when they moved to Hyde, they had this fantastic life. He suddenly became quite sociable. They were active in the local community. He was helping in charities, in the Scouts. They were going to party. You know, they had this fantastic life by all intents and purposes. You know, had their children got grandchildren, and you know, it was just sort of, everything seemed rosy, if you like. But obviously, I mean, we don't know what's going on behind the surface. Maybe, what was he like at home? I don't think he was at home much, because his workload was so high. If you think he was just one doctor dealing with the 3,000 patients he took with him, and then whatever other patients he picked up, so he must have been like a workaholic. He would have always been at work. So maybe that's why the marriage worked, you know, because they never saw each other. I don't know. Primrose, obviously she still supported him after he was arrested, etc. Anyway, what's happened now is her and the 3 children, they've all been given, well, they say children, they're not children now, they're adults, they're middle-aged. His children coming up to middle age, they've all been given new identities, which I think is right, isn't it? Because you shouldn't have to live with that legacy of what your husband or father did, and you're innocent, and then I presume they've moved away and gone somewhere completely different, and nobody knows who they are. And I hope they're coping okay. I hope they're having a good life now, as good as they can. So yeah, there was Sarah, his daughter, was born in 1967. Christopher Frederick, he was born in 1974, and David, born in 1979. Oh, 4, because I've got Sam as well in 1982. So yeah, no, I didn't realise that he had 4 children. I was thinking he had 3. There are no photos available of the wedding. In the video that I'm going to put on in the week, I will be showing you some photos of the family, etc. But there are no photos of the wedding, which I'm not sure. But, you know, in those times, as she was pregnant when they got married, you know, it was still then a little bit frowned upon. You know, now it wouldn't matter, would it? People would be openly pregnant when they got married, and it wouldn't matter, and it shouldn't matter. But I think in those times it did. I know when one of my sisters, well, both my sisters were pregnant when they got married, it was all a bit, you know, hush hush in those times years ago. Now, and he was so cold. He told one patient's relative. I should have mentioned this earlier. When he went to see one patient and they were very, very poorly, he turned around to their relative and said, because it was near to the Easter period, he said, well, I wouldn't buy him any Easter eggs if I were you. You know, that's nice, isn't it, to say? And the patient who was killed, as he was getting close to finding out about him, he killed him on Christmas Eve. You know, and the guy, the patient said it was just so cold to do that on Christmas Eve. I mean, it's bad at any time, of course it is, but you know, at Christmas Eve, just knowing that how important a time Christmas is for people, and to do that is just, he just didn't care about any. I think he cared about Primrose, you know, it seems that way, but none of these patients, they were nothing to him, nothing. Their lives meant nothing. And again, as I've said before, this is what I always gets me with serial killers. It's like only their family is important. Other people's families don't matter. Why don't they matter? You know, how can they separate themselves like that and say, well, my family's important, and you know, I don't want it to come to them, but I can just see their loved ones. Just doesn't make sense to me. But anyway, I suppose we'll never understand how these people think. So anyway, story, as per his story, finally ended in 2004 in Wakefield Prison. It was the day before his 58th birthday, and the prison guards went round to check him at 4 a.m. and he was alive then. And then when they went back at 5 a.m., he was dead. So he would have known as a doctor exactly how to do it, how long it would take, etc. And he made sure that he didn't have to face justice, because I think by then he'd only been, you know, found the case was still unfolding, so the full extent of the case and the actual vastness of this case and the amount of people that were involved in it, the amount of victims that were involved, had not been made apparent yet. And so he's a, you know, typical coward. He didn't, you know, he could have, I don't know, serial killers, any killer, you can't bring the people back, but you can give the families some solace by giving them information. Families want information. They want to know why. They want to know where, you know, they want to know where. I mean, the worst thing is when people don't find the bodies, isn't it, of their loved ones. This case that's haunting me at the moment in America of Madeleine Kingsbury, you know, it's been 5 weeks now. She's just been missing. Will they ever find? You know, there's lots of people that unfortunately they never find, because especially in America, because it's from many different places, you know, that if you want to hide a body, you can. You know, as time goes on, you start to feel dejected and wonder, are her family ever going to, I mean, the best resolution is finding her alive, but as time goes on, it seems less and less likely. And I will, you know, that will be obvious to them as well. Nobody has to tell them that. I'm sure they know that as much as anybody else. They held a vigil over the weekend, but there's no news. There's still no news. I check it every day because I want to give an update, but there is no news. And that is the worst thing, isn't it? And then when they find the body, they want answers. They want to know what happened. So when killers don't give this information, it's a small comfort, you know. So yeah, Lottie, I think the husband, well, I don't know if they were married, but he was their partner. He's the likely suspect, isn't he? I mean, I know, you know, they're always the likely suspect, and we're not, you know, we're supposed to not speculate and think, but, you know, that's the figures, you know, that's the statistics. It is normally the husband. And that Madeleine, she went, you know, went to school that morning with the partner. She was going to split up from him. Well, they had split up. She was supposedly looking for somewhere else to live. Do you know, I think he planned that. I do think it was planned, and I think he had help from somebody else. I don't believe it was, if it happened, I don't believe it was just like, you know, they got into an argument when they got back from the school and he just, you know, lost his cool. And I think he planned. It seemed to be organised because, you know, there's little or no evidence. Normally, if somebody does something in a fit of passion, they find something, don't they? They find some DNA evidence or something, because even if you try and clean up a scene, it's really difficult to clean up properly. You know, they can find traces these days with the new technology now that we've got. So I think he may have planned it. I don't know. That's the feeling I get, that maybe him, there's talk about him and a relative. Maybe it was a planned thing. I don't know. Well, let's just hope that somewhere on along the line, things they have found. I mean, they haven't let the children go to him, so they do suspect him. The police suspect him. They haven't officially said he's a suspect. They've said they're not ready to name a suspect, but I think it's pretty evident that he is a suspect, because otherwise they would have released the children to him. But luckily they've kept the children where the children are safe somewhere else. We don't know where the children are, but at least they're not with him. Yeah. Now, Lottie's saying about, like we all think about Paul Ansell. We're all suspicious about him. And, you know, my thing is, if there's so many people that are suspicious, there's got to be something in it, or is it? Why are we so suspicious? Why? Now that I've worked out how to do lives and present videos as well, because I do know how to do that now, I'm going to do some body language things with, because I've talked about it before, but I couldn't actually show it at the same time and stop it and talk about it, and I'm going to do that at some point, because we're in this sort of vacuum at the moment of, you know, we don't know, we're waiting for the coroner's report, etc. We're just waiting. But you know, I don't know, have the police got any evidence? Have the police just given up on that as far as Paul Ansell's concerned? You know, they need evidence, don't they? Maybe are they just... Now, I don't know if any of you that are watching now, did you see the video that I put on this morning about the Find My Grave, which is really sort of intrigued me. I'm going to check into that as well. So if you look at the Find My Grave site for Nicola, there's like a blurb on there where they say, oh, she died of drowning, unfortunately died of drowning. And yeah, the more people have commented on it, and what I'd noticed more was that Paul wasn't mentioned in the sort of memorial thing from the family. But yeah, thinking about it, they've already put on there that she died from accidental drowning, but we haven't had the result of the inquest yet. So does that mean Find Grave thing? We don't know. Was it? I mean, suppose it says it's from her family, but then they use their names instead of saying from mum, dad, etc. It's actually their names. Paul's not mentioned. Well, he's mentioned in one part of it and not in another part of it. Then his photo's been added on afterwards. You know, there's nothing in this case that's not mysterious, is there? It is so mysterious. Everything you look into, whenever you look into any part of it, it's a mystery. Now, because the coroner has put this block, you know, on everything, no one's allowed to talk about, the police aren't allowed to talk about, nobody's allowed to talk about it. Is that why it's so mysterious? Are we going to get loads of answers in June? You know, or is it just going to be like, is it, you know, it could be an open verdict, or is it going to be accidental drowning? Is that why that's been put on the family? Maybe the family have already been told that it's accidental drowning. Because I think he will know by now what the verdict is. I think it's just waiting for that time for a slot or whatever, you know, sure was, etc. So anyway, let me know what you. So once they've been categorically eliminated, they can go back to the house. Lottie's saying, once people have been categorically eliminated, they can go back to the house, but when they don't secure the house, each moment is a moment potential evidence could be destroyed. So do we think then that they've searched Paul Ansell and Nicola's house, found nothing, or have they, because of course they need a search warrant to go. You can't just turn up at someone's house and say, you know, you have to have a reason to go in there. Again, you know, it's like just going around in circles all the time because we just don't know, and we've just got to wait. And it's frustrating for everyone, isn't it? Because, as I've said before, people are invested in Nicola's case. We feel like, I know we didn't know her, but we feel like we did because we've cared about her, and we want justice for Nicola. So many things strange. Yeah, we all feel the same, so we can't all be wrong. So I think we can't all be wrong. You know, from the comments that I get and from the things that it's like 95, even more, 98% of people think there's something wrong. So surely, why are people having those thoughts? You know, they don't come out of nowhere. So they told PA to go home. Yeah. Well, sometimes I think this will be one of these cases that somebody else, not me, but years to come, will be doing on YouTube, because I'll probably be long gone by then. Somebody will be talking about, the Nicola Bulley case even then, and maybe there'll be more answers by then. There has to be some kind of answers. Just your heart goes out to her family, because those girls as well, they're going to grow up. What answers will they have? And if the answer that there's no real good answer, is there? Because it's going to be either she took herself off and deleted herself, which isn't very nice, because it feels like she's left them. I just can't believe she would have done that. But women do it, men do it. Or foul play from their own father, or I suppose an accident. Maybe that's the best outcome in a way for the girls. An accidental death would be better than thinking that she'd actually made a decision to go off and leave them behind. Okay, so that's it from me tonight. I'm going to go off and have some dinner now. I hope you enjoyed the video, found it interesting at least. And as I say, look out for the proper video, if you like, with pictures and that we'll be working on and releasing later. Probably by Tuesday it'll be out there. And yeah, if there's anything, I know we're all obsessed with the Nicola Bulley case. I only like to talk about, if I've got something concrete to talk about, like that, about the Find My Grave. And I am definitely going to look over these interviews, knowing now that I can actually put them on and we can talk about it together, rather than me, that we can actually watch it, stop it, try and think about what, like Emma. I want to do a video on the Emma effect. I've done the Nicola effect. Why does everyone hate Emma so much? Everybody, right from the beginning, really, people took a real dislike towards Emma, and I want to see why, and also from the beginning, people were suspicious of Paul, starting with that interview. He did that first interview. But you're welcome, Lottie. Thank you for being here with me, and thank you everybody who's here. And I will always remember to live and love very carefully. Of course, that is the most important thing. And until I see you again, may your God go with you. Thank you.